Minister Ramsammy, welcome to Let's Talk with Lakshmee. I have to thank you very much for taking your time out of your busy schedule to be on the television show today.
Delighted.
So my first question to you, sir, is where are you from in Guyana?
I was born in Port Moran, but I grew up in Albion. And all my education, high school years, and so I was living in Albion. And so Albion, Port Moran would be where I'm from.
Okay, so Berbicians, now you know where the Minister of Agriculture is from. So what was life growing up like in Berbice?
Well, like any rural community in Guyana, and now that I'm much older, I've lived in New York, I've traveled the world, and I've lived today in Georgetown. I would not exchange that for anything in the world. I think it's a great kind of upbringing to be able to grow up in a rural community, and the kind of family and neighborly type of relationship that you have. A lot of people tell me today about how great I am talking with people, the fact that I could empathize with people, and so I think it's the rural upbringing. I believe that the opportunity of growing up in a rural community, jumping in trenches, going into the cane fields, climbing trees, just treating everybody's home as yours. Everybody were family. And I called so many people's uncles and aunts, and so many people disciplined us, that I, to my great chagrin today, discover they were not really my uncles and aunts. But I think that kind of rural life in Guyana, whether it was at Albion, Port Moran, or any other rural community where it was one big family, and there was no home. There were lots of poor people, but I can't recall any home without food. It seems like we were all fed by everybody. Everyone took care of us, and looking back, you know, yes, I'm grateful for my mother and father and my relatives, but really many of us growing up in these communities were brought up by a whole community. It was really a village upbringing.
Sounds like you're well-rounded, well-grounded from growing up, and well-traveled as well. I want to go back to growing up in Berbice. Were your parents into agriculture?
My parents did a little bit. My parents were into fishing, a little bit of rice, but my father worked in the sugar industry as a driver, and driving the transport truck. My brother, once he finished high school, worked in the field workshop as a mechanic. But other than that, the union in the sugar industry, GAU, in its organizing years when it was fighting for recognition, a lot of it was done from our home. And a cousin of mine was one of the leaders within the union at the time. So whilst I don't have a direct upbringing in a purely agricultural family, I grew up in an agricultural community, and my family was engaged in some of that.
Excellent. Well, you know, the first question I do have to ask you is, how does the Minister of Health become the Minister of Agriculture? And you're laughing there.
Not just the Minister of Health. I think in Guyana and now the world, because whether I'm in London or Geneva or wherever, people see me as the health minister. I'd become one of the more well-known health ministers in the world. But you know, I tell people, you know, I remember this famous comedian in America, Robin Williams, and the funniest man that I know. And then he took on some serious roles. And people say, he can't play this role, but he won an Oscar for playing a serious role. I don't think that it's a difficult transition for me. This ministry has some very good technical people, but we also need somebody to bring people together. And we need people to talk to our farmers and to our workers in the sugar industry and so on. And I believe in health that was my strength. A lot of people saw my technical side, but really we had many other technical people. My strength was that I was able to bring people together to work towards common goals, and in agriculture we need that. In the 5 weeks I've been Minister of Agriculture, I've been able to meet people in their communities, in the fields, solve problems, ensure that our drainage and irrigation problems are being solved, and so on. So, and I think that was one of the reasons the President made the choice for me to come to agriculture. So yes, I know it seems like an extreme thing, but in fact, I think that I've already persuaded many people that I could fit into agriculture as smoothly and as seamlessly as I did in health.
Well, viewers, the rain was coming down, ironically, so we had to actually come into the Minister of Agriculture's conference room. So, Minister Ramsammy, speaking of the weather, how predictable is the weather here in Guyana?
Well, I think like any other place, it's as predictable as the weather any place. Okay. But it is true that unlike you guys in New York, with winter, spring, and so on, summer, we have rainy season and dry season. And we are now in the middle, in the so-called middle of the rainy season. And in the rainy season, it rains every day. We have been lucky thus far that we have not had heavy rain continuously. And in fact, in most of Guyana today, once the rain falls and gives a reasonable period before the next downpour, we are pretty okay. We wouldn't have floods and things like that.
Now, how would you say the weather has been affecting farmers and fishermen in Guyana?
Well, whether it's Guyana or anywhere, affects farmers and fishing. It affects lives in many ways. Guyana is one of the countries that have been on the early side of the climate changes that have occurred. I'm actually shocked that there are still people in the world that don't believe in global warming and climate change. But if you live in a country like Guyana, you don't need any scientists or so to persuade you, because we have felt it, we have lived with it, and so on. I'm sure you might be interested in 2005, but we have had strange weather, as you have had in New York and as people have had throughout the world. Climate change is real for us, and it has had huge impact on us. As you know, Guyana is a country where most people live on the coast, right, and most of our farming is on the coast. We have a seawall because large part of our country is below sea level. But the seawall don't only keep water from coming in, it also keeps water from leaving. And so when we have very heavy rainfall continuously, our canals and drainage structures are not able to remove water. For most of the coast, we can manage about 1.5 inches of rain per day. But we are now getting things like 8 inches and 12 inches and so on. Yeah, so in the rainy season, we could have rainfall that are way above the capacity of the drainage system. If it stops after 12 inches in a day, it means there will be water, flash floods, and so on. But if it doesn't continue, it will move off, because our structures could move water off. Still, that creates problems for the farmers. Now in Guyana, because we don't have a whole region dedicated to one kind of crop, right, you have competing needs. So when rice farmers in December wanted the rain because they were sowing and so they're putting land under cultivation, so they need rain and need irrigation water. The cane farmers and Gaisuko needed sunshine and dry weather. And these two constituencies are alongside each other. So they're also competing interests. These could have devastating effect. In the recent December rain, cash crop farmers and rice farmers had major problems, and we had to assist them in getting water off the ground. It could lead to such devastating effects as losing your whole crop or losing time, because what happens right now is that for rice farmers who would have had to delay, and the ironic thing is that there are rice farmers who were delayed sowing because we didn't have enough water. We had a dry period from September to the middle of December, and we couldn't move water from the rivers and other irrigation reservoir fast enough. So some of them had to delay sowing of the crop. And by the time people began to sow their rice, the rains came and had too much water now. So they were delayed. And so you have those kind of conflicting needs. This year, we have not had such devastating impact. Knock on wood, maybe I'm blessed that I didn't have all these things to deal with. But part of it had to do with the additional improvements we have made to irrigation canals, to drainage canals, more pumps, sluices working better. You know, the engineers have been out making sure these things work. But in the future, these structures and the canals, the pumps, and so that have served us well this year, or 2011, 2012, will not be enough. And so with climate change and the situation worsening with each year, more rain coming, and so on, the adaptation that and mitigation work that Guyana has to do to cope with these changes will have to be lots more investment, and some of that is already occurring.
Now, climate change, whether this is all acts of Mother Nature. It's out of our control. But you definitely sound like a Minister of Agriculture. I'm sure everybody at home would agree. So what acts are we going to put through? What acts is your ministry going to put through? Because you said it's not going to be enough. So what's the next step to make it be enough?
And I'm one of those technical people that believe there are things we can do. What, though, we can do are things that the developed countries need to do in terms of the adaptation, and whether it is looking at our carbon emissions and so on. The developed countries will have to do lots more, and I would urge people who are looking on at this show, Americans and so, to work with their government to make sure that the Kyoto protocols, and so I'm disappointed with Canada that it has actually pulled out of the Kyoto protocol, because the mitigation, the adaptation things that we can do to have some control over the weather, and it's true, it's nature and so, but there are things we can do. But developing countries like Guyana are not the ones that cause the climate change to occur. And so those adaptation work has to be the developed countries that have been contributing to the reduced, to the increased carbon emissions and so that we have. So they have to do. Countries like Guyana have to focus on the mitigation aspects. What do we do to deal with something that we cannot control? And so Are we going to have more rain? It's in our lives today. It will only get worse into the future. And so what we are doing is, one, ensuring that those structures we have now, drainage and irrigation canal, are maintained better, always in impeccable conditions. Two, we have to make sure that our sluices and pumps are all in working condition, so that whenever we need to release water into the ocean, the sluices can operate effectively, and that whenever the sluices can't operate, when the tides are high, so we cannot open the sluice, we can use pumps to pump water out. We have to look also at dry season when we have to move water in. So if I were to talk about Berbice, for example, the sugar estates, the rice farms, and so they need water to come from the Kanji River. But when you pull water from the Kanji River, you can pull too much, and then you get salt water. And then you have to pull water from the Berbice River, and that's the Torani Canal that helps you to move water from Berbice River into Kanji River and into all those agricultural land. Just an example. And for the older people, Guyanese that might be listening, this is one of the legacy of Chedi Jagan, because the Torani Canal actually allows you to move water from the Berbice River into the Kanji River that could then irrigate all of the agricultural land. In Demerara, we have the Conservancy. And the Conservancy, which was built in 1886, which can store water. So when we don't have enough water, we could use the Conservancy water. And we have to use pumps sometimes to push that water into the irrigation canal. But you have the opposite problem, that when there's too much rain, it will flood areas out, but it will also fill up the Conservancy. So you have to empty water, and that's a system of sluices. One of the things we have done now, really tremendous achievement on the part of the government, is we are building some additional relief channels, the biggest being the Hope Relief Channel. And so for those people driving along the East Coast, when you get to Hope, you will see that there seem to be some bypass roads around the school area. That's temporary because there's a bridge going there, because a canal is coming through that highway. And new sluices will be constructed by the seawall to allow water to move. So it's additional channels, additional sluices. Right at this moment as we are speaking, we have signed a contract with with an Indian company, Surendra Limited, to supply 14 new pumps that will be located along different parts of Guyana to help us to move water out of the area.
Now, with all of these improvements that you do need to do and are in play that you will be doing, will you need more engineers, more workers?
We for sure need more engineers and other technical professionals. Fortunately, right now, this ministry has a couple of dozen of engineers that work within the ministry and along the coast and other parts of Guyana where they are assigned. And unlike when I was a child, where we depended on engineers coming from abroad, or Guyanese who may have attended colleges abroad, we now graduate our own engineers from the University of Guyana. And I'm really proud of the fact that our university are producing our engineers and our doctors and our lawyers and so on. But I'm also proud of the fact that these young Guyanese are holding their own with international engineers, and so we could always benefit from the experience and knowledge of engineers coming from abroad, and every now and then we do need their help. But by and large, the work that is being done are being done by Guyanese professionals. And I think even for those of us who are living abroad now, those who have been living a long time now abroad and don't know this, the fact is that many of our professionals graduate from our own University of Guyana. The older people will recall that it was once called Jagan Night School.
Excellent. Now, Minister Ramsammy, can you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
Sure. I graduated high school here in Guyana and was a young teacher for several years. I taught at Mybe Curie Government School, and I taught at Lower Quarantine Government School and Quarantine Comprehensive in high school. I remember my first days teaching when I was younger than the students in the class that I was teaching. But those were fun days. And I left Guyana early, and I went to the United States of America, where I went to college at Pace University and at St. John's University. And in fact, I got my PhD in biochemistry and microbiology at St. John's University, and then did a postgraduate fellowship at the New York Institute for Developmental Disabilities in Staten Island. That's a long name, but most people know it as a psychiatric hospital in Staten Island. So I then went as a professor of medicine at the State University of New York, and worked also at the same time, had a double appointment as professor of medicine at the State University of New York at Stony Brook, and as a research physiologist at the Northport Veterans Administration Hospital. So that's my education and career in the United States of America. I came back here in 1990, what was then a temporary move, when Jimmy Carter and others came here, as I joined the struggle for freedom, for free and fair elections in Guyana. And I must confess that at the time I came, my goal was to work with Chedi Jagan and others to get free and fair election in Guyana. I was delighted that I was one of those who worked to get Jimmy Carter to Guyana and so on. Those were really exciting times, but my intention was to go back to my job as professor of medicine at Stony Brook. And that's what I saw my life as, and not realizing that I was going to still be here 20 years later. Serving as a member of parliament, serving as Minister of Health, and now as Minister of Agriculture. And some exciting things have happened along the way, and I was delighted to be part of writing a new constitution in Guyana. And so whilst I do miss my family, I do miss my life in the U.S. I'm grateful, that I had the opportunity to live in America and to build a career. But I think also you couldn't pay for the experience I've had in Guyana, because whereas I contributed, I believe, a lot to building research in a number of very important areas in the U.S., some of which are now real things. Here, every day you make a difference in somebody's life. When I help a rice farmer to get water so that he could put his land under cultivation, when I help sugar workers, for example, get paid, all these things, getting, the women in Victoria who came together. These are single parent women who have started a cottage industry, packaging things like bottling pepper, bottling honey, and so, and selling it, changing lives, not just making a living. But I don't believe in subsistence living. I don't believe that that's what we should do as a government or as a people. I believe that we need to create jobs for people, good jobs, but I also believe we need to create entrepreneurs. And that's what we are doing in Guyana today. And as much as we have problems, I'll say this to you right now, that 10 years from now, Guyana will be the country of the Caribbean. We have the potential to be the breadbasket. We're already doing part of that. And look out for Guyana, because we are already self-sufficient. We've always been for sugar and rice, and we are exporters. We're now self-sufficient for poultry and table eggs, and we are putting mechanisms in place that within the next 12 months we could be a net exporter of poultry products. We are now beginning to put mechanisms in place to be self-sufficient in beef, and our next milestone is to be self-sufficient in beef and then be a net exporter of beef. We have begun to develop the rearing and the production of duck meat and also of pork. We have brought in new breeds of livestock into Guyana, and we are helping the farmers to have breeds that are more productive, produce more meat, etc. One of the milestones I want to make sure we achieve is self-sufficiency in milk production. We have long been self-sufficient in fish, and we are a net exporter of fish product. But our focus in the early years was developing our marine capacity. And so presently we export about 30,000 tons of marine fish, mainly sea bobs and prawns and so on. But we have potential to increase that.
And where generally is that exported to?
The Caribbean and the United States of America, North America. Some go as far as Europe, but North America represents our main market now, though the Caribbean market is also growing. But North America is our #1 market for fishing product. In the last few years, we have also begun to develop aquaculture, and already we are producing some 400,000 kilograms of fish that are exported. And so tilapia is the main one. At the moment, more than half of our aquaculture production is tilapia. But we have begun to look at, and we are already producing things like quarryman, basha, hassa is one of our specialty products that we are now doing aquaculture in. Our cash crop, which we are self-sufficient for. So I don't know why we in Guyana, and I hope all my Guyanese sisters and brothers in New York and other places will encourage their sisters and brothers here. I don't know why we want to buy broccoli and so from the United States. We have the best vegetables right here, and we're self-sufficient. But we already are now exporting some 11,000 tons of fresh vegetables and fruits to the United States, to Trinidad, to Barbados, and so.
Is that something that's been going on for a while?
It's building every year. So in 2011, we exported about 11,000 tons, and that would have been the largest amount we have ever done. So yes, we've been doing it for a while, but in small amounts, and it's growing every day now. We also, in fact, last year, mainly to the North American market, exported some 2,000 tons of processed goods, such as pepper sauce, achar, and honey, that we do here. So that's another area, and that's where I'm focusing on the cottage industry so that we could take advantage of things. For too long, living in America and now visiting America, I see people feeding me tamarind balls from Thailand or something like that. Well, we have the best. So I would hope that, you know, we could get into the West Indian stores and so and do these things. But we have been working with our local entrepreneurs. So things that Guyanese like to carry back, not only the pepper sauce and so, but and fruits, but things like, you know, curry powder and all these things, you know. So we've encouraged people to do the curry mix with all the spices in a nice put together package, so that when people come they could carry these package. And for the youngsters like yourself and so who didn't learn how to cook good curry,
It'll be pre-mixed for us, right?
Pre-mix that we are doing.
So we won't make the mistake of how much curry powder, how much masala, how much jeera. It'll be right in there.
So, we are trying to do these type of things. So, and in the simplest way possible, what I'm saying is that I don't want to be the Minister of Agriculture to grow agriculture for the production of raw material. No country in the world today and in history has ever been able to end poverty through agriculture alone. But agriculture can be the catalyst and the propeller of a country on a growth trajectory if it is value added. And by that I mean we have to convert agriculture from producing things in the field and take it directly to the table to also having an industry. And so looking at the development not of agriculture but of agro-industry. And you don't know how long you left Guyana, but you would know that even in your little experience in Guyana, we used to grow rice and have the paddy in bags and export it. Today, through enterprises such as Nand Prasad and so on, we are packaging the rice. And sugar, you'll recall we used to send bulk sugar abroad. Today you have Demerara Gold being exported to the Caribbean countries. In fact, we can improve that. And indeed, we started a few years ago with Blairmont doing packaging of the little sachet and also the bags, 1 pound and 5 pound bags of sugar. And they had a capacity to do 10,000 tons of packaged sugar every year. Blairmont, that is. And this year, last year, we added Enmore that has a capacity to do 40,000 tons. So together, we'll be able to, when Enmore comes fully on board, to export 50,000 tons of packaged sugar, which carries a higher price. And later, we will in fact be doing not just packaged sugar, but processed sugar, that is converting brown sugar into white sugar. And that will add more value to our sugar. But sugar is an agro-industry. It's not just pure agriculture. And now rice is going in that direction. And we want to make sure that the rest of agriculture go in that direction. So by doing that, you can take agriculture from subsistence living to actually having entrepreneurs and having it as a business, and that is what will propel Guyana forward. So with the growth of mining, with the growth of agriculture and the transformation of agriculture to an agro-industry, I could see Guyana moving. You know, in 1992 we were a least developed, bankrupt country. Today we are a low middle income country, and I could see Guyana by 2020 becoming a high middle income country. and for Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, who say that by 2025 or so they will all be developed countries, I have a message for them that I wish them well, but I'm not letting them go, or we in Guyana will not let them go by themselves. We will be there with them as developed countries.
Excellent. Let me ask you a question. The company Domino Sugar in New York City, do you know who they get their sugar from?
Well, a lot of it is produced in the United States of America. As you know, sugar, the white sugar that Domino does is processed sugar, and they have to have the raw brown sugar to do it. The United States and Europe have quota systems, so we are allowed to export bulk sugar into the United States, but we have a limit of 12,500 tons of sugar. In Europe, we have a limit of 195,000 tons. So in terms of processed sugar, it's a little different, and that's where we want to get into the market. So we will introduce some new brands of sugar, and we are negotiating with various companies. One happened to be a US-based company to come and develop processed sugar in Guyana.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the processed sugar is just basically for cosmetic sake, am I right?
Well, no, it's, well, yeah, it doesn't give you any more nutrients or so on. And for many people, the brown sugar is a preferred use for baking purposes, etc. But in terms of what people like to see on the coffee table, it's the white sugar, and it carries a higher price. And so we need to get into that direction. If you're a diabetic and you need to use sugar, use the brown sugar.
And what about, I mean, being that we're in the sugar topic here, what about the cubes? You know, they make the little cubes for tea, like in London, give me 1 cube, give me 2 cubes.
That we have to go. That's the value added. Not only does it carry a higher price, but internally it creates more jobs and better paying jobs. So that's the direction we are going. You know, I grew up when so many of our families were cane cutters. They cut cane, back-bending jobs, and we are mechanizing now. And as we mechanize, we also want to create not less jobs because of mechanization, but more jobs because we transform the industry to value-added production and creating more jobs. As our university graduate people, I would want to think that we are moving away from the more menial jobs to more meaningful jobs, where people could go to the university, get trained, and have better jobs. So agriculture can provide that, but agriculture is a purely field thing, will never provide the opportunity for your university and your vocational school graduates. So these are the things we have to do as our culture changes with time. You know, if you go to our university, 65 to 75% of the graduates are today females. And so if you don't provide the opportunities for them, and you will never be able to provide opportunity. I come from the era when I graduated high school, the only thing available was to be a teacher, a civil servant, or a laborer, unless your family could get you to go and study abroad to become a doctor or so. And today the university is producing graduates, engineers, accountants, doctors, engineers, and so on. And we need to change the economic structure of our country so that you could provide jobs for these people. And that's what we are doing. But in doing that, you're not only meeting the needs of people, you are also propelling your country. We have lived a long time as a poor country, and I don't believe that what we can promise to our people should be a better poor country. I don't want a better poor country. I, period, don't want a poor country. So I want to be better, but not a better poor country. I want to make sure that our people continue to have options of leaving Guyana, but I also want to improve the chances that in exercising their options, they will want to stay home. And as long as you're a poor country, even a better poor country, you're not going to want to stay here.
You sound like you have all the makings of a president. I have to tell you that right off the back.
I have aspirations for my country, not aspirations for the presidency of Guyana. I, in fact, think that, you know, I enjoyed talking to, I didn't have the opportunity of working in government with Chedi Jagan, but I had the opportunity of working with him as we fought for freedom and democracy in our country. And I had the opportunity to work with a very bright man. In fact, I had the opportunity to work with Janet Jagan. And I will never forget the humility, but the pride that she had in being Guyanese, even though she wasn't born here. And I had the opportunity to work with a very bright young Guyanese named Bar Jagdeo. But I have the opportunity now of working with the new president, Donald Ramutar. And I know his aspirations for Guyana, and it's not dissimilar to mine. So it doesn't really matter who's the president. I believe Donald Ramutar will make a great president. But I believe that whether it's Donald or whomever, we will never move our country forward unless we work as a people. And we have an opportunity right now to work for our people. That should be what drives us, to work for all of our people. And our people need to come together. And we have a real opportunity to build this country. And we have the potential, it's always been there. But we have built the governance and the infrastructure of this country, because without building that, you will not achieve the aspiration for our El Dorado. But I believe we have done a substantial part of that work. We still have more to do, whether it's building the bridge to Suriname, building a new railway system on the East Coast and East Bank corridor into our city, build back our city, build our institutions, because we must give people good health and a good education system. But this country is one of the few countries that have invested in health and education like we have. And so we have a bright future. And I don't want people to give up on our country. And I hear all the bad stories about corruption and all these things. But like every country, we have these issues. So I think there are many of us in Guyana right now, many people who have been in the struggle, who have fought, that are capable of being good presidents. I have never been shy in saying that I think I would make a good president. But I also know that only one person can be president. And for a long time now, for a very long time, for more than a decade now, I have said that my role is not the president of Guyana. My role is to work with various people. There's somebody who needs to talk about vision, about what we want to be. And I have never been shy. So what I want Guyana to be, I want Guyana to be a developed country. I really believe we have the potential, and I believe that we can do so in my lifetime and in your lifetime. I don't believe this is something for, you know, other people's lifetime. We can do that now. And if you don't dream big, you will always achieve little. I am a big dreamer, and I don't have any apologies. I am an idealist, but I do believe that Guyana was the El Dorado that Sir Walter Raleigh and others came to look for. Guyana today remains the El Dorado of this region. But the Guyanese people have always shown that they have the capacity to make good out of virtually anything. We have done it in New York, we have done it in New Jersey, we have done it in Florida and in Miami, we have done it in Toronto, we have done it in London, we can do it here. And you see glimpses of that in our country. And look what we have done the last 20 years. And I know some people would inject politics in this. This is not about politics. Our country is better today than it has been. And we may not want to admit that it is better country. But we have challenges. We have major challenges.
I can't imagine that anyone would not admit that the country has indeed developed tremendously in the past 20 years. Question, Guy Suko, what is the government doing with this multi-billion-dollar industry?
And Guy Suko is an example of what the future of this country can be. For hundreds of years, Guy Suko was Guyana, because we had just sugar. We built rice later, bauxite industry was developed, and so. But you know, in our troubled years, I want people to remember this. Because in our troubled years, in the 1970s and 1980s, when Guyana had descended into bankruptcy, and in saying that, I'm not reflecting back to say bad things about anybody. I'm not interested in whose fault it was. But we had lessons to learn. But one of the lessons is that in our bad years when we descended into bankruptcy, because we were bankrupt by 1992, we had a debt of 2.1 billion US dollars in external debt, not the local debt alone, just the external debt, $2.1 billion. We were paying $94 out of every $100 we earned to service the debt. That left $6 of our earnings to run a country. When you took the public servant salary bill, that was another $20 out of every $100. Add $94 to $20, we were being asked to do so. When we took this government, we were being asked to do what Moses was asked to do, to build stones from straws, because we were asked to take $114 out of every $100 to pay two line items on the budget: service the debt and pay the civil servants. You had no money to build roads, you had no money for the energy needs of the country, and so you were bankrupt. In those years, it was Guy Suko that carried this country. There was something called a sugar levy, and that took out money from the sugar industry. So instead of the government using the money from sugar to maintain the factory, and so you're talking about an industry that provide direct employment for more than 20,000 people and indirect support for more than 125,000 people. That was at the time the major part of your economy, and you didn't maintain it. So by 1992, Guy Suko, because it wasn't maintained, was on the verge of collapse. People should not forget that by 1992 we were producing less than 100,000 tons of sugar. And in fact, this industry was on death's door. We, as a government, we transformed Guy Suko so that by 2000 we were producing close to 300,000 sugar again. We had recovered the industry. But over the last several years we have had major challenges. We lost the price for sugar was cut by the European Union unilaterally, instantaneously. It wasn't like they gave us notice that in 10 years' time we will cut the price. They instantly cut the price by 37%. Can you imagine any industry where the price was cut by 37%? And so that affected our cash flow enormously. And we have had to deal with that. And because of that, look, Trinidad went out to sugar. Barbados, it's almost dead. St. Kitts, St. Vincent, rice, sugar died. In Cuba, which was the region's #1 sugar producer, from 10 million tons, they reduced to under 1.5 million tons. So sugar was dying in many places. In Guyana, we have kept it alive. And I am not, as Minister of Agriculture, going to sit here and tell you that everything is rosy with Gaisuco. It has many serious challenges that could be very debilitating. Not unlike General Motors encountered in the US some years ago. And you remember and you recall, you know, people must be reasonable with us. I don't really care what others say, but I care about what Guyanese say. And the same Guyanese who live in New York and who are willing, I know some names, but I'm calling no names, but that are talking about this. In America, the banks, General Motors, Chevy, all of these had to be bailed with billions of US dollars so they could survive. Why? If you take the financial industry in America, you know how much it contributes to the economy? 3%. But the US think that that 3% of the economy was big enough that they needed to use taxpayers' money to rescue the financial industry of America, because you couldn't allow 3% of the economy to collapse. And so billions of dollars, almost $1 trillion more than once. George Bush had to do it. Obama did it twice to rescue the financial industry and rescue other industries important, like the motor vehicle industry. And you know, everyone knows that that was done. Gaisuco is too important for us in its time of need. After having bailed this country out for so many decades, Gaisuco does need help today. And I would hope that every Guyanese give its solidarity for us. But it's not on death's door, so people shouldn't think that. In 2010, we produced 220,000 tons of sugar. In 2011, we produced 237,000 tons of sugar. So even if we forget 2000 and so on, we are doing a little better. And compared to where we were in 1992, we have doubled production. And this year, I'm hoping that we would produce 265,000 tons of sugar. For all the naysayer and the doomsayer, let me say this, that Gaisuco is still an important industry in Guyana. And 20 years from now, when I'm playing with my grandchildren, well, maybe there will be adults by then too, well, at least teenagers. Well, I don't know, it might be teenagers. I don't have any right now. But 20 years, when I'm with my grandchildren, I would be able to, I'm just assuming I'll be alive, that I will smile and say that, you know, I told them so. Because I know for sure that 20 years from now, Gaisuco will be a star, and that Gaisuco will still be a very important part of the economic picture of this country, and our trajectory towards high middle income and developed country status would be assured, because Gaisuco survived and Gaisuco is still a star.
Now, I want to talk about the farmers and their produce and the roads. Now, I've seen a lot of improvement in the roads in Guyana since I've been visiting for about the past 10 years. I come back every year for the past 10 years, and I've seen lots of improvements. But I also see a lot of places that need to be improved. Lots of roads that when you turn in have tons and tons and tons of holes. And not only holes, for instance, in Garden of Eden, where my parents live, they're remigrants, they live here. Exactly. And it looks like boulders fell from the sky, and these holes are in there. And where they live in Garden of Eden, there are farmers in the back who actually sell chicken eggs. So now what happens is these farmers who are trying to drive through with their chicken eggs, the eggs are cracking. So they're losing business. What is your ministry going to do about fixing the roads?
Well, there are two aspects. So let's speak the first thing, which is not agriculture. Let's talk about highways, roads, community roads, and community streets. Okay. I grew up in communities where we played on mud dams, and I am sometimes embarrassed that today children are still playing on mud dams. One of the aspirations of our government, one, is to build the highways. I don't think any Guyanese could, if they want to be fair, not give credit to this government for building our highways. We're building these highways, we are improving them, we're converting them into 4-lane highways, and we're building new ones in certain places. Major community roads like Kanji Road, Blackbush Polder, roads going into Parika Back Dam, and so on, Canal Polder, all these roads we are improving. Okay. And I don't think anyone will fail to acknowledge that. And of course, if they do, they're not being objective. Then there are the community streets. In many communities in Guyana, we have converted mud roads into asphalted streets. In many communities, we have converted, red brick road into better roads and so on. So you have that. But there are still many communities that don't have their community roads. And in some cases, we have built the roads and they have broken. Because we have to take better care of our roads and so on. So we're doing that. In this term of government, we have been, in the last term, we invested a lot of money to build our community streets. And in this term, I know the president is determined that there should be no community that is without good community streets and roads. That is why in the new community, and that's an irony because there are some old communities that don't have good streets, but there are some new communities with almost impeccable streets. And that's
because they're new, they just went up.
Because we are building our communities differently now. We are putting in the infrastructure. But I believe that it is still a little bit unfair, and we need to do a more accelerated program to build those streets. So that's a thing for the Ministry of Works and the Ministry of Housing and so to continue to work. But as a Minister of Government, I'm not going to restrict my advocacy to agriculture. I want to make sure that I can say in my time in government that I could go to every community and say, you know, I am very proud of the fact that we work together so that in this modern age, people have good community streets. And people don't, I don't want to see what the young girls used to do when I was a teenager. You know, dress up in their room with their shoes and so on, and then walk down the stairs and then take it out back and walk through the mud and then have to wash it someplace and put on their shoes again.
So what do you think is the first step if someone, and like I said, I've seen lots of improvements. I mean, the roads, the bridges.
Programs are now, as I said, budgeted for in our community improvement project. So over the next several years, you'll see some of that being done. And we have to strengthen local government to do that, because in some areas, and some of the worst community streets are in Region 4. So that's local government has to function there. But our aspiration is to make sure that nobody lives in communities where there are not good streets. Having talked about that, there's the other part of the infrastructure. Those that you're talking about, the agriculture people, whether it's rice or cash crops, and the access roads. And these are particularly troublesome for us because they're in areas that you don't have people living normally, but the farms are there, and the tractors and so on breaking up the dams and so. So in a country like ours where we don't have all the resources, it's a very difficult thing to invest and build, and then it breaks up, and then we have to build it again. And so this is where we'll have to have cooperation from everyone. In some areas, for example, when it rains, the farmers leave their tractors and so at the back and don't traverse the road. But in other areas, they are not as careful. And so we have the roads broken up, and we have to keep going and rehabilitating these roads. And at the moment, we don't have the kind of resources to build heavy asphalted road.
I was about to ask you, if an asphalt road was built, in your opinion, how long would that road last?
Depending on what kind. If you just throw some asphalt, it wouldn't last for more than a year. So for these road with heavy traffic, and when I say heavy traffic, I don't mean the frequency, but the heavy loads being carried. You'd have to build roads that are very costly, extremely costly, that we don't have the resources right now for. But these are areas, buildings. In many areas of the country, the access roads have been improved. And whilst it's not asphalted concrete road, they provide good access in and out. But there are some areas where we need vast improvement. And this is where we are focusing now on. And that's where my ministry comes in, to try to improve those access roads. But you cannot develop agriculture to where we want to take agriculture if you will not develop the infrastructure. And as we take agriculture deeper and deeper into our country, this will become even more important, because whilst people might survive on a short stretch of road that is bad, if you drive agriculture miles and miles and miles inland, you will need better roads to get your produce out and to get people in, because more and more we have to have heavy equipment. In the old days you plow it with cows. Now you have heavy equipment to plow your land, and everything is done in some mechanical fashion. And in the old days where you literally fetch your bags of paddy out, you now need tractors and so to do it. And remember, you could talk about fetching these things a couple bags at a time in the old days, but let me just remind people that in 1990 we produced 50,000 tons of rice, and last year we produced 401,000 tons of rice. So some of those things that you did on bareback and that you could survive moving in one form or another, you have throw some things on a donkey and move them around, can't be done today. And therefore we have to build that infrastructure. And that's the chicken and egg story that Guyana has, because getting the money to invest on the infrastructure first is always something that and not debating, but we do as we need. Sometimes we have the money and we invest, and sometimes we wait until we produce to get money to invest. And so it is a country that has grown. Our GDP has grown from $300 per capita to now $2,600 per capita. And so we are having more resources, but the needs are diverse and competing. It's always a struggle of, do we build the access road this year, or do we build a new school? Do we build a new hospital? Do we buy a new x-ray machine? So those are the kind of competition for resources. And I know that I had little sympathy for my Minister of Agriculture when he was fighting for money to build access roads, and I was fighting for money to buy more x-ray machine, more medicine, and so on. And today, I will be very sympathetic to my Minister of Health as he quarreled for more money, and I quarrel with him and with others to get more money for these things. But I think that, yes, these are dire needs of our people today. And as much as it's a challenge, we shouldn't defer these needs for too long, because we need to build the industries today.
You're very compassionate when you talk about any ministry, and that is indeed a great thing. I want to ask you, do you think that there's corruption in ministries?
Corruption is a universal thing, and I want the country that has no corruption to stand up and point their finger in my direction. It's almost like Jesus asking people, the one who is innocent, to throw the first stone. But having said that, I, as a minister of this government, will not go on record to say that we have no corruption. My president has said that. But we have to distinguish between what we say corruption here, there, and everywhere. But more importantly, we have to distinguish between state-sponsored corruption versus corruption that occurs on the basis of individuals. Now, we have come through a history, and we must not excuse whatever corruption occurred today because it used to occur in our country. I came back to a country in which state-sponsored corruption was prevalent. I'm ashamed of the fact that my country had something like that. And I want to make it clear that as a minister of this government, I know that this government don't have state-sponsored corruption. And yet, if you look at and add all the corruption that occurs in terms of money, it might be more than it used to be. But we had a small economy. If you look at your projects and so on, today one project may be more than you had then, because our budget in 1992 was just about $19 billion. Today it's $164 billion. So even if you have less corruption in terms, because the state doesn't sponsor it, in terms of absolute amount of money, it might be a great amount of money. But this government has done everything in our power to limit corruption. One, in 1992, state audit was not occurring. The Auditor General did not have any books to audit. The government didn't keep books. And this government has made sure we strengthen the Auditor General office. We open our books, and that's the irony. It is we pointing out the corruption when it occurs, and people should remember that. Secondly, we made sure that the Auditor General no longer reports to the Ministry of Finance. The Auditor General now reports directly to the Public Accounts Committee of the Parliament, which is chaired by the opposition. These things never existed before. Now it exists. We have a tender board that announces all of the awards. And in fact, these things are open for public scrutiny. We present all our books to the Parliament. The Public Accounts Committee scrutinizes the Auditor General report, and so on. And so, when you look at what we are doing, it's comparable to what most of the developed countries and countries with strong democracy do. With all the things we have in the US, it hasn't stopped corruption. And with all the things we have done here, it hasn't stopped corruption. But we are making an effort to ensure that people who are caught are dealt with. And this president has said that we must look for more mechanisms that will further reduce corruption. So yes, it occurs, but it is not something unique to Guyana, and it is not something sponsored by the government. And most corruption are pointed out by the government. And we must be careful that some of the things that people talk about, whether it is mistakes that have been made or it is corruption. We have everything, all our projects are tendered out. It's open tender. Anybody could tender. And it goes through a process. And sometimes people win a tender. Take the one that is on people's minds now, the Amila Fall Road. And we have had to cancel that contract. And a lot of people point that is an example of corruption. But I ask, one, it was a road that had to be built. It was advertised. There were a number of people who tendered. It went to the lowest bidder. And this is the damned if you do and damned if you don't. Because had we not given the contract to the lowest tender, which is FIP, Motilal, and Synergy, everyone would say that that was corruption because we gave it to one of our friends. Because the next bidders would have been a consortium of local contractors, and the next one to that would be BK International. Had we given it to one of them and not Synergy, which was the lowest tender, they would have said, you see corruption. They ignored the lowest one. So we gave it to the lowest tender. And obviously he has had problems. And the fact of the matter is we have had things built in the contract to make sure that a road was delivered. And having not delivered it, we terminated his contract. And when the whole reconciliation is done, you would see that we haven't lost much money. We have lost time though. And that must worth something. And so, yes, we would have things like that happen. Sometimes a contractor tender out and they take too long to deliver. But this is a developing country that in 1992 had no capacity for construction. In 1992, when the PPP government came in power and Chedi Jagan advertised road construction, all the companies that won the tender came from Trinidad and other countries because we had none. Today we have people who could build roads. Today we have people who could put up big buildings. Today we have local contractors doing the seawall, the sea defense and so on. And yes, these are not perfect things yet. And yes, we don't have enough contractors that could do some of these jobs. And that leads to delays. And yes, we have what could be questionable supervision that would fall under the aegis of maybe corruption. But none of these are done as a state-sponsored activity. And all of these, in fact, are revealed in time, and the government takes action, because this government is a government that wants to make sure that we have value for money. We are absolutely against corruption, and we will continue to work to make sure that corruption is not a plague on our country.
With the recent elections, do you feel that enough farmers and fishermen came out to vote?
We had a turnout at this election of 74.1%. And so when you take the United States of America, where turnout is usually 40 and 50%, people ought to be a little bit more careful in talking about whether people came out to vote or not. There are so many stories being told, and we need to know the truth. And the fact is that over 70% turnout in any country is a high turnout. And you know and I know that a certain percentage of people who were on the voters list were no longer residing or present in Guyana at the time of the elections. So when you look at it, more than 80% of the people who were in Guyana went to vote. I could attest to that. I walked house to house in Region 6, and I know that most people voted. It is true that the PPP Civic lost some support in this election. There were many things that became topical during this election. The fact that the PPP won the election again is manifest of the job that it has done in government, because we won in 92, we won in 97, we won in 2001, won in 2006. It's the 5th election in a row, and for many, many countries that is unprecedented, because governments sometimes lose not because they have done a bad job. They have been around a long time and people want change. And so the fact that we won this election is testimony to the fact that we must have done a good job over all of our terms in government. And a lot of people who voted against us concede that. But there were many personal things in this election. This was not the nicest campaign. I'm being kind. There was a nasty campaign out there with a lot of stories being told. Unfortunately also, I think that many people appealed to race, and that had an impact on what happened in this campaign. And so now we go into a new era. We won, and people shouldn't forget that we lost the majority, where now it's only one seat more we needed, by a few votes. With a few more votes, we would have still be the majority in Parliament. But the people have spoken. That's the strength of a democracy, that people have a voice. Every citizen have a voice. And the citizen used their voice to give us a message. And the message is a clear one. One, that we want Donald Ramutar to be the president of Ghana. No one can deny that. That we want the PPP to form the government again, but we want the PPP and the opposition parties to work together to keep our country united and to develop our country. One of the nice things that happened when the president was sworn in is he called on the opposition to work with him. And in fact, called them in and made certain commitments. I do not want to, to just look on the bad side. The first day of Parliament was not a good signal because, the party with the largest number of votes in most of the Commonwealth, in all the Commonwealth countries, is the party that gets the Speaker of the National Assembly. It is Prime Minister Cameron's party that has the Speaker in the British Parliament. This time around in Canada, Prime Minister Harper got majority, but the last time he didn't have majority. But it was his party that got the Speaker. In India, the Congress party did not get a majority, but it has the Speaker of the National Assembly. In Australia, in many other countries, but in Guyana, the opposition didn't even talk to us. It's ironic that they keep talking about the tripartite collaboration, but in the first major test of tripartite collaboration, the opposition did not talk to us. They talked to themselves, and they chose a speaker. The AFC has the speaker, but the AFC only had 7 seats. We had 32. APNU has the deputy speaker. We got 26 seats. We don't have anything there. So this was the first test of how we will work together in a tripartite arrangement as mandated by the people of Guyana. In the first test of how willing people are working together, we are still waiting for them to come and talk to us.
How do you...
But it's not only that. For people listening, my Guyanese sisters and brothers, the AFC first candidate for the speaker was Mr. Moses Nagamutu. I want to ask the AFC what happened to Mr. Nagamutu's candidacy. Why did APNU not select Moses Nagamutu? I don't want to go into the reason, but I ask my brothers and sisters, Guyanese living in Guyana and living abroad, what is it that APNU had against Moses Nagamutu as the Speaker of the National Assembly? They did choose an AFC candidate, but I remember Mr. Kemraj Ramjatan as the head of that party, the presidential candidate of that party, said to the people of Guyana that the best candidate for the Speaker of the National Assembly was Moses Nagamutu. What happened? Who betrayed whom? And so this is what people need to look at. Who has the interest of the Guyanese people at heart? We will continue to work assiduously, diligently to develop this country. And we will make the accommodation and the compromises that are necessary. But we will deal with facts. We will not make up story, and we will not, mislead the Guyanese people. Unfortunately, this campaign saw a lot of misleading statements. A lot of people were fooled. And we now have to ensure that the mistakes we have made will not put Guyana back, that we will continue on the trajectory of development, because Guyana have come from slavery and indentured laborers. We've come from a place where our people had their backs bent, they were beaten down into the ground. The soil on which we walk and play and work today and all my Guyanese brothers and sisters who live abroad today, the soil that gave birth to their lives are mixed with the blood and the sweat and the tears of our people. And we should not be misled again. So we will continue to do what we can do to build this country, in spite of the fact that we have a parliament that might want to work against us. We will work with that parliament for the good of our people. And in spite of the fact that we were betrayed in the selection of the speaker and the deputy speaker, we do have a speaker and we do have a deputy speaker. I, for one, and I know the government, congratulate these people, and we will work with them, because we have only one thing, and that is the good of our country and the good of our people. We are too proud, and we have too much pride in our country to want to see that for pettiness and for the grab of power that we sacrifice our country. Our country is not for sale, and our country will not be put on the altar to be sacrificed for people to grab power. And so I could assure people that, you know, I was ready to leave, to resume my life someplace and continue what I was doing before I came to Guyana. But I stayed. I stayed because I know this is the El Dorado of the Caribbean, and I know that we will make this dream a reality.
Let's go back to 2005, when Guyana was affected by a horrible flood. I remember children swimming in the roads, people using furniture like refrigerator doors, sofa cushions to get from one spot to another spot. Do you think Guyana will ever experience such a flood again?
I would hope not. I think structures like the Hope Canal, structures like the new cottage relief channel and so on have added to our capacity. I think Guyana also learned an important lesson, that all these drainage structures and so that we had closed. And you know, the Dutch had built a network of sluices and pumps and so on, that somewhere along the 70s and 80s were closed. And we are now putting those back into operation. We have expanded some of the sluices to increase drainage out. And so I believe we're better prepared for that. Yet, I do know that if we have rainfall like we did in 2005, we will have some form of flooding in our country. We are better prepared, though, for that. And so I would hope, and I am confident, that 2005 will not recur in Guyana. But if it comes, we are better prepared.
Better prepared, excellent. What is your opinion with tsunamis in Guyana?
You know, Guyana is such a blessed country. Hurricanes don't affect us, earthquake doesn't affect us, but there are some within our region, some of these geographic structures, like off the Grenada coast, an underground volcano, that could possibly lead to tsunamis. And so the possibility of tsunami in Guyana is not as high as off the western coast of America or in the Asian countries or so on. Having said that, it is not improbable that we could have, because as I said, we do have, like off the Grenadian coast, the underground volcanic structures that could lead to tsunamis. And that's why I would urge the investment be made also, not just in Asia or the Pacific Ocean, but in the Caribbean Sea, for us to be able to have early alert systems for tsunami. It is not as high a risk as some other regions, but it is not improbable that it occur. And I think once the possibility exists, even a slim possibility, we must have mechanisms that could detect that. And the U.S. have extensive systems, and I believe, as I have been advocating, because I'm sure you will ask me about weather forecasting and so on, that the U.S. satellite system, which could help in picking up some of these occurrences early, can stretch to cover Guyana. They cover parts of these regions, but they don't cover like the coast of Guyana, for example. These are some of the things in our cooperation, technical cooperation and so that we're talking about.
Now, what is your goal as the Minister of Agriculture?
Well, one, right now, I would like to see agriculture transform, where it moves from a purely field activity to one of an industry, an agro-industrial enterprise, where it is not just farmers that are making living out of this activity, but that we have entrepreneurs that are participating in growing this industry. I would like to see agriculture continue to play an important role, not just as a subsistence living for people, but to ensure that it propels Guyana from a low middle income country today to a high middle income country by 2020 and to a developed country soon after that. So for Guyana, I would like to see agriculture become not an ancient activity done the same way that our forefathers, that indentured laborers and slaves participate in agriculture, but that agriculture is done in a modern way, being mechanized, and that computers and so find itself in the industry. And so what I would like to see is that when I speak to a child who may want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, that the child could see agriculture as an entrepreneur enterprise that he or she would want to be. And finally, what I would like to see is not only agriculture feeding our people so that we are one of the best fed people in the Caribbean, but I'd like to see my sisters and my brothers, and my American sisters and brothers, and my European sisters and brothers see the products of Guyana as the preferred product. I want Guyana to be a brand name, and the Guyana flag is seen on a product that people will want that product in their kitchen and in their homes. That's my vision for Guyana, and that's my aspiration as a Minister of Agriculture.
Minister Ramsammy, I have to thank you very much for this interview. I'm indeed very proud to have been able to interview you as the new Minister of Agriculture. You have answered all of my questions regarding the new ministry, as well as what your plans are in the future. I wish you all the luck, and I can sit here reassured that you are going to make a great Minister of Agriculture.
Like I was at Health.
Like you were at Health. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.